It's officially time to welcome in Peter King to the Brock mania that has swept throughout the Bay Area. And look, we're not trying to get too far over our skis. There are other shows, other hosts saying this is the best thing ever. We got a long way to go before it's that. But in terms of debuts, Peter King, have you ever seen a better third rounder take the reins of a team that's supposed to go somewhere and make it appear that they haven't even hit a speed bump? It was very impressive yesterday from Brock Purdy.
You mean a third dayer, not a third rounder? I mean, because obviously Brock Purdy, the end of the 7th round of the draft, I think there's two things about this situation that I think are really, really interesting. One is that I think that when you're a quarterback, especially, and I think I'm right in saying this, I think he played 48 games in the Big 12. I mean, look, the Big 12 is not the SEC, but it's also not the MAC, I look at it and I basically say, people are talking about Brock Purdy, who started for 3.5 years in a major college conference. They're looking at him like he's never played before. And I think that is the first real misleading thing. It's funny, the other day I had a long conversation with Baker Mayfield about his game. And I asked him, are you surprised that the 49ers didn't put a claim in on you? And almost like right out of the box, said a couple things. But then he said, hey, I'm telling you, this is before yesterday. He goes, I love Brock Purdy. He said, I've always thought that guy was tough, confident, really, really knew what he was doing, and it totally unprompted. And so I think his point was, they wouldn't claim me. They got Brock Purdy. And that sounds so funny coming from a guy who was the first pick in a draft versus a guy who was the 262nd pick in another draft.
It's some Big 12 brotherly love happening right there. I mean, Purdy is, and, the number on its surface, you're the 39th best ever. But when you think of all the quarterbacks that have ever played, he is the 39th most prolific passer in the history of college football.
Yeah. He had a good career, and he lost a bunch of games, especially in his last year or so, and people just said, that's the end of Brock Purdy. And plus, he doesn't have great quarterback size. As I said last week, I met with him last week, and, he's 6'1", so they say. I mean, he's probably closer to 6, but whatever it is, look, he's had a lot of experience. And I think there's one other thing. I've always thought, I've covered the NFL for 39 years. And one of the things I always think that is a part of a quarterback's ethos, that if he doesn't have it, he will not win. And that is the ultimate confidence in himself. And, there were times, the first team I ever covered in the NFL was the Cincinnati Bengals. There were times I talked to Boomer Esiason, like after a game, and I would think, what game was this guy playing in? He was talking about, how many chances they had and what they should have done and all this stuff. And we had this and we had that. But that's the way you have to be. It's like this in the Seth Wickersham story about Andrew Luck the other day. Anthony Costanzo, the former tackle of the Colts, said to Luck at one point that, hey, listen, you have to be the most confident guy on the team, whether you believe it or not, because if you're not, people are going to see that. They're going to smell it and all that. And so I think that's one of the things that quarterbacks have to have. And look, in my 10-minute meeting with Brock Purdy, I said, oof, this guy really thinks he's good. Not in a cocky way, but just like, he's not intimidated by saying Tom Brady's going to be on the other sideline. He thinks it's cool, but he doesn't say, oh my God, I'm not showing up. He thinks he's got a chance. Here's the one interesting thing I thought after yesterday's game. So now Brock Purdy has played one full game and about 50 minutes of another, maybe 53, whatever minutes of another one. So he played two full games. And you would think about Brock Purdy that if this guy can average 20, 22, 23 points a game, that's going to be great because the defense is that good. But, look at what's happened in the first two games. I think I'm right in saying that Brock Purdy's put up 57 points in his 105 minutes or whatever it is, 110 minutes. And so he's done more than we all thought that he would do. And so that's why, and again, look, it's silly to sit here and say, yep, 49ers got a chance to beat the Eagles in the NFC Championship game at Lincoln Financial Field the last weekend of January. It's silly to say that because I don't know who's playing for the 49ers that day. Is Bosa going to be healthy? Warner going to be healthy? Is Aziz going to be healthy? I don't know because the 49ers play football like a rolling ball of butcher knives. They are all out every play, and so they tend to get a few injuries. So I don't know who's going to be on the field if and when they were to play the Eagles. So I can't tell you who's going to win that game. But right now, if they faced off against the Eagles, I don't think Brock Purdy would get shut down by any stretch.
Let me ask not a stylistic question, but a narrative question. What's the most apt historical comp, just in terms of narrative, to the idea of a third-string quarterback getting the job in, still with 4 or 5 games to play and still making a deep run? What's the narrative comp?
Well, I'd have to think about that. The lazy one that comes to mind is Tom Brady. He was the second string quarterback, but the one commonality they have is that in 2001, which was the year after Brady got drafted, he basically was in an indoctrination session in the year 2000. He wasn't going to play. He was just there to learn about the game. But I think starting in 2001 in training camp, Bill Belichick honestly thought in that year that if this guy needs to play, we might be better than we are with Bledsoe. And I know that sounds crazy because at the time, Bledsoe was the highest paid player in football, and Brady was a 6th-round pick who nobody ever heard of. But I remember going back to training camp when everybody was wondering about what was going to happen with the Niners and how was Trey Lance going to play. Garoppolo wasn't even in the picture at that point. But it was basically Trey Lance, Sudfeld, and maybe they could stash Purdy on the practice squad, or maybe he'd be a number 3. But he'd impressed so many people so early in training camp, Kyle Shanahan was already telling everybody, hey, don't forget about Brock Purdy. He could be a factor at some point. And you knew, I'll never forget my first thought when they basically got rid of Sudfeld, and Sudfeld ended up in Detroit. My first thought was, and this is amazing, but he has, that's how much confidence that Kyle Shanahan has in Brock Purdy. And obviously he's borne out that confidence. So Brady is a lazy person way to look at it. There must be a good third stringer, Ray. If I had been able to think about this for 10 minutes before this, I'm sure I would have thought of somebody, but the only person I can think of low pick coming absolutely out of nowhere, in the last, 20 years or so is Brady.
And now the question that strikes me with all the Brock Purdy stuff. How much easier is it for him to run an offense with that defense as a cushion and Christian McCaffrey to hand off to and to throw the ball to in the backfield as many times as. Is this the easiest job a third-string quarterback has ever had?
Well, maybe. But, Ray, Brock Purdy would be an idiot if he said, hey, I only have to score 17 points or 20 points and we'll be fine. I mean, he's not going to think like that. He just isn't. And so he's thinking, we're going to score every time we touch the ball. So I really don't think he thinks like that. But as far as in reality what the job is, I think the reality of the job is very much like you say, that, don't turn it over. I mean, I think even though I think I'm right in saying this, guys, you would know this, right? I think that in these first two games, the Niners have had to burn 3 timeouts total because they were getting down to it and they didn't want to get a delay of game call. Maybe 1 or 2 or all 3 of those were because of communication issues, between the sidelines and Brock Purdy. I don't know. But the fact is, and I wrote it today, and I forget how many plays, whatever, a lot of plays, 120 plays or whatever. And Brock Purdy has not had a delay a game yet. And so, you would think that that's because Brock Purdy knows what he's doing. He knows the offense. He knows the calls. And he can get them to the players very, very quickly. And look, I could tell last week when I was in their locker room after the game, there were veteran guys who were talking about this almost with a shrug of their shoulders, like, he just picked up, where our offense clearly would want him to. That he wasn't struggling with any aspect of the job. And you also notice that in both games so far, one time in each game that I've seen, he got the crap beat out of him on a pass rush. One by Jalen Phillips last week against Miami, and then yesterday, I forget who, but it was very early in the game, one of the first plays, where he just got leveled. I think it might have been Keanu Neal, I forget, but it was somebody. But anyway, my whole point is he's just not affected by it, and that is from having played in 48 games in the Big 12 and having come in as confident as a player can come in.
He's a tough kid. He looks like he's got a good head on his shoulders. He sees the game. He feels the pocket. And that's a good place to start. Peter King with us here on Damon and Ratto on 95.7 The Game. And Peter, it's really hard to measure an hour before every minute has ticked on by. But given the fact that he's having a degree of success, even though Jimmy Garoppolo isn't a typical second-string quarterback, maybe it's unfair to say that. Trey Lance wasn't a typical first-string quarterback. Jimmy takes over, and now it's Brock Purdy. Given the fact that Kyle is not only the coach of this team, but the GM who swung for Christian McCaffrey, given the fact that DeMeco Ryans is getting the credit for the way this defense is playing, this defense has been handpicked by Kyle Shanahan as the general manager in conjunction with John Lynch. Is this Kyle Shanahan's finest hour?
Well, you would think that when he has designed an offense that is quarterback friendly enough so that a guy who was the 262nd pick in the draft, regardless of his college experience, nobody else wanted him, regardless of the fact that he now has to play the 262nd pick in the draft in 2 big games. Obviously the game against Tua, the most electrifying offense, whatever you'd call it, in football 9 days ago. They're certainly not now, but just this incredible offense comes into Santa Clara, and the defense handles them. But the defense handles them, certainly, but they also, even if the defense was just okay, Brock Purdy played well enough in that game to, to make sure that they were going to score enough points. And I think, obviously, the weird game that yesterday was, the one thing I would say about it, because it's a cliche to say Brock Purdy against Tom Brady, but what that showed me yesterday was that, as I said a minute or so ago, Brock Purdy is totally unafraid of everything. He's unafraid of a good pass rush, which Tampa has. He's unafraid of the storylines, the plot lines headed into the game. He's unafraid of, obviously, of playing Brady. And he has taken what Kyle Shanahan has educated him about, and he basically has made it so that I'm just out there playing football. And that's the thing. You can tell if a guy has happy feet, or you can tell if a guy is not ready for the moment. Zach Wilson of the Jets, when he played the Patriots and threw 2 out of his 3 picks in the game, were absolutely absurd. They were just terrible throws, horrible decisions. Zach Wilson was not ready for the moment. For whatever reason, maybe because his college days, maybe because, he's worked so much with Shanahan and Garoppolo and Lance and all that, whatever. He's ready for this moment. And that's one of the reasons why now I don't think anything this year is out of the question for the Niners.
The rest of the league, is starting to sort of hit a wall here or there. I mean, Dallas had trouble getting past Houston, and I'm exempting Philadelphia in this. But I asked Mike Irvin this earlier, and I'll ask you, given that the 49ers have hit their stride and have now been at full stride for 6 weeks now, is there such a thing as peaking too early or?
Yes.
Okay. Elaborate.
Yeah, because, hey, Ray, you know why there is? Because when you peak too early, I guarantee you that 6 weeks from now, in their biggest game of the year, the 49ers are going to have 5 or 6 personnel issues that we did not see coming. Every team will, almost every team. The Eagles have been remarkably uninjured, remarkably whole. I think they've only missed one of their starters on the offensive line has missed like 2 or 3 games. And the rest of them have just played them all. And so that to me is something that says to me that that's a hugely valuable part of it. It's not necessarily peaking too early, but can you keep your team whole? And I'll never forget this. My second and third year covering the National Football League, I worked for Newsday in New York. I covered the New York Giants. In 1985 and 1986, the New York Giants had what I would say individually were mediocre players on the offensive line. Brad Benson, Carl Nelson, Bart Oates was a pretty good player, but I mean, they were pretty average offensive linemen. But you know what was interesting? You add in Mark Bavaro, and those 6 players, the 5 linemen and the tight end, started 32 games in a row in the regular season. And so you know what happens at that point? The chemistry becomes a huge issue. It's a huge factor. So the only reason I mention that is that very few teams today are the same on December 12th that they are on January 25th. Things happen. People get hurt. Injuries happen. And so as of right now, I would say, I wouldn't necessarily say peaking too early. I would simply say that if you told me that, and if you told me Deebo Samuel was back, if you told me everybody else was in the same situation they're in right now and they're all playing, I give the 49ers a 50-50 shot at going to Lincoln Financial Field and winning the NFC Championship game. But, as Bill Parcells once said, they don't sell insurance for that kind of stuff.
Peter King with us here on 95.7 The Game. a huge game for the 49ers in Seattle because it's the fork in the road of keeping the pedal to the metal or winning your division. And just on that alone, your playoff spot is secure. Obviously, health is paramount. Should the 49ers, looking at a regressing Minnesota team, try to chase a 2 seed? I mean, I'm obviously not going to go out and try to lose.
I don't think it matters. I just don't think it matters. I think Kyle Shanahan, Aziz Al-Shair told me something in the locker room last week that he goes, so many teams, have this mindset that we'll be okay next week. We'll be fine. I'm not that worried. We're not that worried about not playing well this week. He goes, we don't care. He said that's definitely not our attitude. We play every game, like it's the most important game we've ever played. So a game in September matters exactly the same as a game now at this time of year. And I mention that because, my opinion is, I think sometimes, and look, the 49ers need to win this game for a lot of reasons. I don't think for seeding purposes, but I do think that it's pretty important to make sure you win this division. And if they lose this game Thursday night, they breathe life into a reeling team. And I'm not saying that Seattle will win the division if they win Thursday, because I think even if they win Thursday, they're not going to win the division. That's how good I think the 49ers are. But you don't want to let them up off the mat. Having said that, if your trainer comes up to you and says, hey, Bosa is, he's going to go, but I'm worried about him making this injury a little bit worse.
Sit him.
If I were Kyle, I would be thinking very, very seriously about limiting the amount of play that Bosa has, knowing that you've got 10 days after this game before you're playing again. And that, to me, that mini bye coming at this time of year is utterly fantastic. I think it's a huge edge to the Niners, knowing that they can take Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. And I don't know how Kyle Shanahan will work the rest of this. What I mean rest is, resting players. But a lot of coaches will say, let's say coaches would normally come in, have players come in on Monday, and then on Tuesday they'd give them off. A lot of coaches now say, listen, guys, take these 4 days, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and we'll see you on Tuesday. Because they're telling them, get off your feet, rest, do what you need to do to take care of yourself. But I think having that mini bye at this time of year is a big advantage to the Niners.
Peter, this Niners defense has held opponents scoreless for an entire half 8 different times so far this season. That's the most in the NFL this year. And it's the most by the franchise in a single season in at least 52 years.
Wow.
And, sometimes just one guy, and maybe it's a less heralded guy, can be the difference between really good or great. I'm thinking that guy might be Dre Greenlaw on this team. He had a career-high 15 tackles, pass deflection, an interception of Brady, which Brady was nice enough to autograph that football for him after the game. But Dre Greenlaw, just like we were talking about last week, Talanoa Hufanga's not getting enough press, enough attention.
Yeah.
Dre Greenlaw might be the next in line. Yeah.
Look, he's on my very short list right now. Normally you think, you pick a linebacker for your all-pro team, you're going to pick Fred Warner. But I'm thinking very seriously about Dre Greenlaw. There's a bunch of really, really good linebackers in the NFL right now, some of whom are really flying under the radar. Greenlaw, it's hilarious, but I watched this little press conference after the game that, when he was talking very sheepishly about he's a little fangirl, wanting to get Brady to autograph it. But look, give credit right here to Adam Peters, give credit to John Lynch, give credit to Shanahan, and now give credit for an excellent linebacker in his own right, D'Amico Ryans, for developing the instincts. Look, the athleticism of these guys is good enough, but I think because D'Amico Ryans played the game at a very high level, he can see how good guys like Dre Greenlaw and Fred Warner are and all that. So I think the team that is developing, that is drafting and developing players on the defensive side of the ball, I think we all thought that Robert Saleh would be a really, really big loss, and he has been a big loss. But the fact is, D'Amico Ryans was ready for this job, and D'Amico Ryans has his fingerprints all over Dre Greenlaw.
As a guy who carried the banner of Sports Illustrated in his career, any thoughts on the passing of Grant Wahl?
Well, other than I hope I don't start crying, because I've been talking about Grant a lot in the last few days. And, Grant Wahl was everything you would want in a colleague, everything you would want in a friend. And I've told this story a few times over the weekend. I went to Sports Illustrated, was delighted to send me to the World Cup in South Africa in 2010. And I wanted to go. I thought it'd be a cool assignment. It's kind of in the football off season and everything. So I go to the World Cup, and I am under Grant Wahl's supervision, and he's telling me everything. Get to know this goalie. Great guy. He's going to be the key to the U.S. hopes. So I spent 45 minutes one day with Tim Howard, this goalie for the U.S. He goes, go meet Bob Bradley, the head coach of the U.S. team. He's a Parcells freak. He loves he's a Jersey guy. He loves the Giants, all that. So I told him 10 stories about Parcells, and he was a rapt audience one day. So, but Grant understood the currency of information and how to basically be able to do your job better. And he was never selfish about it. And I just think that there's so many young people in our business today who really owe so much to Grant Wahl. And even though I was 15 years older than he was, I owe so much to Grant Wahl for his perspective, for his absolute total passion. There was nobody. I don't think anybody loved his game more than Grant Wahl loved soccer. I mean, Paul Zimmerman loved football. He didn't love it more than Grant Wahl loved soccer. Peter Gammons loves baseball. He did not love baseball more than Grant Wahl loved soccer. And it showed every day when he did his job. I just think that as this sport gets so big in the United States, the saddest thing is that the bard of soccer in the United States, who would have written 50 memorable stories in the next 20 years, who would have ushered in everybody in 2026 when the World Cup is in the United States and in all of North America. He would have been your tour guide and your person who told you, educated you the most, and entertained you the most about soccer of any media person in the United States was Grant Wahl. And we'll miss him professionally, and I know I'll really, really miss him personally.
The pouring of emotions from all directions speak to the life he led, not just, like you said, professionally, but personally as well. And I thank you very much for sharing that about him. I know I didn't even plan on asking you that, but I'm glad I did. Peter, thank you for joining us. It's always a pleasure.
Guys, a pleasure being on with you. Thank you.